Hello you guys, welcome, hello, hope you're doing good. Today we're going to talk about one of the most ambitious project I've ever had, and still do, which is this dress, or as I hope it will look, this dress. If you're anything like me, you probably grew up with these sort of, teenage films, and I've watched Ever After many times with Drew Barrymore and, grew up thinking she was freaking amazing, which she is. So I actually started this dress 2 years ago, and I have many concerns about it. As you might know, if you're not new here, but if you are, I am probably the slowest seamstress in the world. It takes me forever to get things done. I think it's because I enjoy the process of making a lot, so I make sure it takes me as long as it can, which is quite, I think it's a form of self-sabotage maybe. This dress is very complex. One of the advantages of it is that it has been on display quite a lot, so there are many high detail photos of it. I did start this project 2 years ago before I had a YouTube channel, so I don't really have any documentation whatsoever of how far I've gotten, but I haven't gone very far, so that's alright then. I started this because I wanted to wear it to MCM London in 2018, I want to say. And it was meant to be for the May one. I decided to do it in January, and then I had all of my supplies by February, and by mid-March I realized there was no freaking way this dress was gonna get done in 2 months. Because, as you know me, I like to make ridiculous decisions, and I decided to embroider fabric. Basically, this dress has very specific textiles, and I couldn't find anything that resembled the actual ones enough for me to commit to them, so I decided to make it because, you know what, why not? So the dress here is as far as I've gotten in terms of the base dress. I'm pretty worried about it because I did start it 2 years ago, which means my body has changed, especially with quarantine. So I'm a little concerned that it won't actually fit me, but all the seams are still accessible, so it's still salvageable. In particular, the hips on the skirt here look very tight. However, there is an overlayer to the skirt, so even if it is a little tight across the hips, it can easily be disguised. I did do the skirt seams with French seams, so that'll be a bit harder, but I can always add a panel. I think I have some of this fabric left over. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to take you through the supplies that I have, what has actually already been done, and what I'm working on at the moment, and what the next steps will be. So this will be part 1 of making this costume, and depending on how quickly I get along, I'll keep doing progress reports, because I think it's one way for me to make sure I don't forget about it. So I say I started this 2 years ago, but I haven't been working on it consistently. I sometimes have spurs of a moment where I need a little break from actual sewing, so I'll do an embroidery. I'll focus on embroidery for a week or so, but I don't consistently sit down and do it, which means that over the past two years I've probably only worked on it for a couple of weeks really. It's just sort of been sat in a box. But I would really like to finish it because I do have all the materials for it, and I do sort of have the time-ish. So I think I just need to make sure that I schedule it in, I timetable it into my schedule to work on it, because it is a beautiful dress, and I hope I can make it a beautiful dress as well. It's one of those iconic moments when I was growing up where, it's sort of a coming out transformation dress, kind of like Hermione's, and I've already made Hermione's, so I'm just gonna keep going through and making all of my dream dresses. This is definitely a very complex project, and I'm not rushing it at all. It doesn't have a deadline. There probably won't be conventions until late next year anyway, so I have quite a lot of time to finish it. Yeah, let's get to it. So, let's talk materials. So I've had this bucket next to my sewing desk for 2 years. This was originally an organizational move, and I thought I could get a couple of these buckets and this would be my current project bucket. So it has just been the breathe dress bucket for the past 2 years. But yeah, it holds all of my materials and sometimes just random crap that needs somewhere to go, like American Duchess stockings, So these are all of my materials. So these are the patterns for the embroidered sections of the skirt. And then this is the panels I still have left to embroider. And then all of my trims. I do have some fabric left here, which is good because I wanted to show you what the fabrics look like. So, this is the draped section for the front, or maybe the final one. And this is the lace I mentioned I was not happy with. So this was advertised online as gold lace, but it's super orangey peach. I'll insert a close up so you can see a little better. And it's more of a like burnt bronze gold, so I will definitely be replacing this. But this is what the midsection at the front looks like. And then I've got, so the whole thing about it is that it's got like a million different trims in it. And so I just bought a bunch of gold and silver trims that should work depending on the sections. I think this one is for the sleeves. What I did was I had really thorough plans, which I'll grab and show you in a minute, but I printed out a bunch of the close-up photos that I could find, and then I went through and I tracked every single trim so that I could count them up and then buy them accordingly. So for example, I've got this one, which I think is very much like, it's similar to this one, but it's more of a silver. It does have a little bit of a blue tinge, so I'm not sure how it'll play out in the end. Oh, there's loads of fabric here. Excellent. I haven't touched this in a while, I'll be honest. Yeah, so this is the full bit of the lace that I was talking about. It is a nice lace. It's really cute and it was really affordable, but it's just the wrong color. You can see it next to this golden trim. I'll do some close-ups because the light here is horrendous. Should I turn this off? Is that better? Maybe a little. So the gold trim, no. I mean, sometimes there's no light in Glasgow, but somehow I still look like a ghost. Fine. I bought some scalloped edged lace. This is definitely for the sleeves. I got some silver thread, which I'm hoping to use to overlock the edges of the embroidered panels. They seem to have some sort of finishing on them. I'm just not completely sure what that is. And I wanted to get, so it's not actually, it's silver colored, but it's not actually metallic. It was the cheapest I could get. It's a Aerolock Madeira thread. So my idea is that I'll split off into like 3 spools, so I can use my overlocker. Because that's kind of what it looks like. It looks like a rolled edge seam. I do it by hand, you know how I am. Then I bought some more sparkly silver trim. I guess this is all just going to be close-ups. And some ribbon. There's moments of gold and silver ribbon, so I've got both here. And so and just some more random trim. I bought a couple of extra because I had free shipping and they were quite affordable, and because there's so many, it was just in case one of the other ones didn't work out or something. And I've got the draped actual fabric for it. And then so these, the last and probably the most important trims, I actually had custom made. So this is going to go along the front edge of the dress, and these were quite expensive, but they are definitely worth it because they are beautiful. I got them, I think, from an Indian seller on Etsy, and they're beautiful work. And then I also got some flower sections that I can applique on the dress to make it look a bit more like the one on the original. And then finally, I have this, which is pretty damn cool. This is the actual front bit of the dress, and it's pretty similar. I think I found this on eBay on an auction listing, so it's not available anymore. We might be able to find other copies of it online. It's a little bit smaller than the one original in the film, but I think it's pretty close. And what I plan to do is I will embroider some additional sections that I can applique onto the front to make it look a bit more like it. And for that, I have bought, probably not enough, but I've bought some silver embroidery thread. And finally, this was the beginning of my embroidery for the sleeves. I have some organdy, I think, cotton organdy, and some like lightweight gauzy linen. And so my idea was to flatline these two fabrics together. And then I made a template for the embroidery. This is for the sleeves. There are all these sort of flower sun motifs going through the sleeves. And so this would be one size, but they're all different sizes, so I need to get a couple more. And so this would be transferred onto here and then embroidered quite heavily with, I think it's silver and gold thread. And then they would be fuzzy cut out and appliqued to the tulle undersleeves. Now, I haven't even started doing any of this because I have this whole skirt to finish and I haven't started construction or anything, draping or anything on the sleeves at all. That's for another video. The bodice is made out of this crepeback satin, I think is what it is. This was pretty affordable. I bought it online. I can't remember how much of it I bought, but it wasn't too much. I think it might have been 4 to 5 meters. So I draped the bodice on the stand and then I made a couple of mock-ups. It was quite hard to fit because it has this, the panel front here will have lace and embroidery on it. And as you can see, it's not currently featured on it, but I did include it in my draping and in my fittings. And then over the crepeback satin on the bodice, I've got a silk organza, which also features on the skirt. So I think it just gave it a really nice silver sheen. And this silk organza was, I think, one of my best finds because it was pretty affordable and it's definitely silk and it was the perfect shade. So I was really, really happy with that. And then I remember that when I first made it was the time I discovered understitching. I didn't know about understitching, but I discovered about it, and so I decided to finish the neckline with a facing, but as you can see I made it way too narrow at the center front, and it's a little bit bulky here, so this will need trimming back and then folding and trying to correctly place it. So my budget for this was quite limited, and still is, because it has been so expensive because of all the heavy trim it needs. So I was trying to find the cheapest ways that I could get around that. So I'm not really sure what to do about the lace. I still have time, so I'll have to wait for a lucky find, I think. And then, so these are the armholes. As you can see, I haven't done anything about the sleeves yet at all, because I quickly realized I had bigger issues. And then across the back, you can see that it doesn't quite fit my dress form, and I am a little concerned about it, but I squish a bit better than my dress form. This wasn't drafted to go over a corset at all, it was just drafted to go over my usual normal underwear. So I am concerned that it looks this tight on this dress form, which was made using the bootstrap patterns, fashion, whatever. So it should be like an exact body replica of me now, not 2 years ago. So I am a little concerned, and I haven't really had the time or the mental capacity to fit it. But I will say that on the side seams, which are unfinished, they're quite large. I think they're 1 inch side seams, so I can let it out on the sides quite a lot. I just hope that I don't have any bigger fitting issues with that. This skirt looks kind of horrendous because it is quite tight across the hips. I'm not sure why. I don't think my hips have changed that much. It might just be that I drafted it too tight to start with. And then I can't really show you because there's nowhere I can get full length. Maybe I can just angle you. Bam! So the skirt is quite long because at the bottom the hem will be turned inwards, padded, and then embroidered. I'll insert a photo here if I can remember to do it. So it needed to be quite a long hem so that I had enough to turn up, and it should be about like 10 inches or so that get turned up, so that's why it's quite long. I don't think I have any spare crepeback satin, because if I do, a quick fix for it to be too tight across the hips is I can just add a panel in the back, because there will be an overskirt covering it. It doesn't really matter where the side seams end up. It's not a fitted skirt by any means. It shouldn't be anyway. And that's it for the base dress that I have. So the other big element, which you can just see here, is why this has taken me so long. So this is one of 4 embroidered panels that are going to make up the skirt. Yeah, the back ones are the biggest ones because the dress has a train, a bit of a train, as you can see here. And this is the silk organza that I was telling you about that covers the bodice as well. And then this was hand embroidered with a, not really a fake chain stitch, I would call it, and some metallic DMC thread. Originally, I struggled a lot with this, but I'll go a little bit more into it when I talk you through the embroidery. But yeah, so this is what it looks like. The second panel, the second one for the back, is nearly done. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the embroidery. So the embroidered overskirt has these sort of wavy motifs with like little dewdrops kind of thing. I couldn't find any fabric like it at all. I decided to embroider it. Originally, I wanted to try doing tambour because I thought the effect was very similar and it would have been a lot quicker. I've done one class of beginner tambour at the Royal School of Needlework and it was really good and really got me hooked on it. So I really wanted an excuse to use it, I guess. However, when I first started doing it, I couldn't figure out a way because there was only one kind of metallic thread available to me at my local craft store, which is the DMC metallic embroidery thread. Can't remember exactly what it's called, but I'll put in an image of it here. And that was not working at all for it was too bulky a thread for tambour really. And usually with tambour you can use as fine a thread as sort of sewing thread, but obviously I couldn't do that because the embroidery looks quite chunky. So instead what I did was I used a fake chain stitch for the first panel using that awful DMC embroidery thread. It was awful because I had to use 2 strands to make and then I would just come up in between the two. Is it a split stem then? You would come up in between the 2 threads and it sort of creates a little bubble and then you keep going. Because I had to use 2, the thread was quite thick and it frayed like hell. It got tangled like hell, which means it took forever. I embroidered every night for 4 to 5 hours for 3 weeks, every day, and I only managed to do the outline of 1 skirt panel. That's when I realized I had to give up on my timeline, and then I had to do so each of the little dewdrops. That was a start and finish to each thread, so that took forever as well. However, after finishing that first panel, I realized I can't deal with this thread anymore, so I had to look for alternatives. I went back to the tambour idea and I got a couple of good recommendations online. I tried a couple of Kreknik threads and they were really nice, but they were quite hard to find and really expensive in the UK. Until finally I ran across oh, it's right here, you idiot. I came across this thread, which is also DMC. It is much thinner than the other one I was using, and so it did actually manage to work with tambour. It's still a little bit annoying to do. It's not as nice, and it does create a little bit of pull on the fabric, but it worked much better and it was much faster. This second panel that I worked on looks a little bit different from the first one. That's just how it is. It's not a super noticeable difference. So like if you were standing a little bit apart, you wouldn't notice a difference. It's just that this thread is a little bit finer, so the embroidery looks less chunky, but it also looks really good, I think. I did do the outline with this thread in tambour, but I couldn't figure out a way to do the dewdrops in tambour because it has to go through the pearls and come back up and secure the pearls. I looked at a bunch of tutorials. I bought the only book on tambour that I could find, and there wasn't nothing quite worked with this sort of the chunky bead, the big bead, and the way I had to lay on the side. Yeah, I couldn't figure it out, and that's fine. So instead I still do those by hand using this thread. The only thing that I have in terms of downside to this kind of embroidery is that the back of this is super messy, and I'm kind of afraid that if one comes out, the whole of it will come out. So I think before I actually finish this dress, I will try to back this with something just to protect the back of the embroidery and to make it look a little bit nicer. But yeah, so I thought I'd just take you how I do the embroidery, take you through how I do the embroidery. We'll start by finishing off the pearl section in this panel. So it's quite of an annoying thing to embroider because I do actually have a big embroidery frame which I use for the tambour outline, but for the pearls it doesn't work because you have to roll it over the edge, and so with the pearls it just, you can't get it to grip it. So instead I use a small embroidery hoop like this, and then because of the weird shaping of it, sometimes there are a couple of ones that it doesn't work, so I use a smaller hoop. And I use this thread. I bought like 12 of them in bulk once when I had a Hobbycraft gift card. And I bought pearls. Thankfully the same seller I used 2 years ago on eBay was still selling these pearls. They're pretty affordable and they're fine. I mean, they have quite a lot of imperfections on them, but because there's so many of them, I don't think it really the tears. And I have my little tambour hook. There are kind of different sizes that you can get for these. I think I'm trying to use the medium one. Basically, I wanted to use the smallest I could while it's still working, because it literally makes a perforation through the fabric, so it can make it look a bit ugly depending on your tension. It's quite hard to negotiate. Again, I'm not an expert, please bear that in mind. So yeah, for now we're just going to finish off doing the little stems. Something I will say is that I don't use a precise method for any of this. So they're not like super equal or super even. But I think the overall effect is so busy and stunning that it doesn't really matter. So yeah, let's go do some embroidery. Funny story, you guys. The way I mark this is that I do 2 inches from the top here down to the bead is 2 inches, and then I do an angle and do 1.5. But for the whole of this panel mostly, and the previous panel, I had a particular ruler that I would angle so that one of the like indentations on the ruler was matched with something, and so that would give me the same angle across all of them. But I have since broken and lost that ruler, so it's kind of guesswork now. But yeah, so I have my threaded needle here. It has 2 strands of the DMC ARCL silver thread. I usually start with a bit longer than this, but this is what I had left. So I just come up in the middle of the top little section there, and then pull it through. It makes a really nice noise when it goes through the silk. This thread is high maintenance. All of these metallic threads are quite high maintenance. And then depending on how hard you pull it here, you can loosen it a little bit so that it creates more of that chain stitch effect. And then you come in through the middle again. So just down. I do have a couple of different stands that I can use just to make the process easier, so I can use both hands rather than having to have one hand holding the hoop. But it's not really worth setting up either of them, because as you can see, this is the last one I can do in this hooped section of the fabric. So again, I'm not being super critical of how long my exact stitches are, because otherwise I would be here for an additional 15 years. So yeah, I mean, if you look online, you'll have seen that there's lots of people who have made this dress in a much more quicker way, where you can definitely find fabrics that are evocative of the effect of the one on the film. And I even did there's a really good version of, I think it's the Costumer's Guide to Movies or whatever it's called. It has really good high detailed photos. It has detailed drawings of motifs, and it also has all the information they've gathered from interviews and stuff about the sourcing of the fabrics. And to be honest, a couple of them were sourced in Soho, I think it was, so I could have gone in to find them. But to be honest, I don't think they would be within my price reach. So there really wasn't any point. Plus this movie was made like 20 years ago, so highly doubtful. So when I reach the end of the section, I just take a bead and I put it through, go back down, and then I anchor it. So I found after doing my first panel that whatever I was doing to anchor the beads wasn't enough. So what I do is I come up through the previous little chain section, pull it taut, go back down. Now I don't finish off every single stem anymore, because I can just, like here, I can just travel up and then continue. But because my thread is too short to continue, I'm just gonna anchor it. So what I do is again, I'm not saying this is the perfect way to embroider, it is not, but it's how I found works for me, and it's speedy and comfortable enough. So I make sure that I'm not just catching the embroidery thread, I'm also catching the fabric, because I have found that when I was moving the other one, some of the beads came off and I had to redo the beads, and it was a whole thing. So I just try to anchor them as best as I can, and then I do a knot. So I go through and pull it taut, and then I cut off the thread, but not too close. not too close to the actual knot. I leave a little tail like that, which is quite unsightly, but I found works better at securing it because the thread is so slippery that the knot can come off. So I take a long length of the thread, and as you can see, it is really annoying thread because it starts. Can the YouTube thing work? No, it can't. But well, if you could see this, you could see that it's this kind of metallic embroidery thread has 3 or 4 strands spun into one, and it does start like disassembling and fraying really easily, and it can be quite hard to thread. But I'm trying to use as small a needle as I can because, again, the same thing with the tambour hook. I want the perforation on the fabric to be as small as possible because silk organza doesn't really, it's not like linen or cotton or anything, it doesn't really come back together. So the holes that you punch in the fabric stay. And although it's a really strong fabric, because I've had some issues where when I was trying to test out tambouring it with a bigger hook, and it was not enjoying it, but it was still holding, so it's a good strong thread. So yeah, I just knot my thread like that and then continue. And this is why it takes forever. And that's it. That's one little stem. My camera is saying it took 9 minutes, and that is missing one of the biggest stem. So I think I did time myself once, and in an hour I managed to do 5 maybe, with all the threading and rethreading and stuff. So yeah, you can see why it takes a long time. But now let's go and have a look at the tambour embroidery. Okay, so the first thing I have to do is mark it. So these are the front panels for the embroidery. Something I did not mention is that these panels actually get pieced or maybe loose. But there is another fabric that goes into this overskirt that isn't embroidered, and it's the lightweight polyester organza that I have in the closet, which I'll show on a different video. So can't quite remember what was going on with these, to be honest. Okay. So I have, oh god, okay. 1, 2, 3. Turns out there are 6 embroidered panels on this skirt. 6. Six embroidered panels.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Okay, so let's take, did I even number them? What am I doing? Okay, so you can see here that I kind of started thread tracing one and then promptly gave up. So we'll be using that one, I guess, because hopefully it'll be able to go more apparent. So I've thread traced this panel, which I think is the center front panel because of the curve at the top. So instead, today we will be using the friction pen. Here we go. I have done a tester on a piece of silk, and it does indeed disappear. So I made these little templates out of cardboard when I first started doing the embroidery. I have a couple of them, and my idea originally was that they would be connected, but I found that they broke off really easily, so I just do it one by one now. So you got to keep in mind kind of where the fabric is going to lay, so you don't really want to do it just as a straight across, because you got to remember what I usually do is that I try to find the grain of the fabric and follow it, because according to the way the dress is going to go, the grain is parallel to the floor, so it should work fine. I also try not to go over the same spot with pen a lot, And then, to be honest, is quite a lot of just guesswork. Using the grain of the fabric is pretty important in trying to keeping an even design. Now that I have the whole pattern drawn out, I'm going to put it in my frame, which is this. This is not the biggest embroidery frame you can buy, it's just the cheapest that I could easily get. So it is quite big and it works fine. With the back panels, the fabric was wide enough to take up the whole of the frame, so that wasn't an issue. But with these front panels, they're a lot narrower. So what I did was I basted a fabric extension, as you can see here. These aren't the best basting stitches, but hopefully it will be enough. And I'm gonna put it on the frame now. Disclaimer, this is not the best or proper way to do it. I actually read up how to do it and it seemed very time consuming considering how often I have to change it, so I couldn't be bothered. So here's what I do. So my frame has these little bits which you can just rotate, and they're the ones that grip the fabric to the frame. Now please keep in mind I haven't done it in a couple of months, so a few months at least actually. And a fun fact about me is that I have about as much memory as Dory from Finding Nemo, so it's always a discovery. So the first step is to position your fabric over your frame. So mine isn't quite enough to reach the edges, and that's okay. And then what you can do is you use this and then you just put it over like that, and it traps the fabric in there. The more fabric you can trap in there, the better grip it will have. But mine isn't very long at the top, so I won't be able to trap a lot. Okay, so that's the top. So then what I do is I pull the fabric and stretch it over like this. And you pull, because especially for, in general for embroidery, but especially for tambour, you want this to be as tight as possible. So I just stretch it over like this, and then you slide this in. Now, if you do embroidery a lot, you might want to look away because you will cringe. So as far as I understand, the proper way to do this is to sew like herringbone tape or some sort of tape to the edge of your fabric, and then you do this. But alas, I cannot be bothered doing that every single time. So I anchor the thread and then I simply sort of zigzag it over the arm of the frame, pulling to stretch. This has been working fine for the other two panels I did. I didn't find, because I left quite a large margin on the organza, I didn't find that it stretched, it warped or destroyed the fabric in any way. But again, this will depend on you, your choices, and your life decisions. So just make sure it's quite tight, especially if you've pieced your fabric like I have. Now, I would just like to remind you that earlier in the video, I did very clearly say that I have had one lesson of tambour embroidery, and this is the only project so far where I've used it. So, that said, the start is usually a bit rough, especially after I've left it, what, 4 or 6 months since I've last done this. And then usually by the end of the panel, I'm much better at it. So This won't be a video about how to like do all the details of tambour because there's a lot to it. And so I'll instead just link a couple of tutorials that I sometimes use to remind myself of how to do it because as I mentioned, I have the memory of Dory. So tambour is actually a pretty straightforward movement, and I find it can actually be really relaxing. It does require all this setup, so it's not like something... I did get different sort of frame support so I could do it on the sofa. That you can lose your stitch, and the way to stop it is to put your hand under that, because if one comes off, the rest of them can come off as well. So you want to grab the last loop you still have, pull the thread back, and then repeat. So if my tension was better, this would be so much easier. What I might try to do is, I don't know if you noticed, but my embroidery hoop is covered in bias tape, and this was an advice from the person who taught the class at the Royal School of Needlework, because it helps grip your fabric better. So what I might try to do is do that, but on the two bars of wood on this frame, and then maybe that will help with gripping the silk organza so that the fabric is tauter and it's much easier to embroider. Because as you can see, like, my fabric is quite loose. I think that's enough for now. You can see it's quite rough, but as I've shown in my other close-ups, I swear I know how to do it better. I just need some practice because it's been a few months. And it will look a lot better when it's got the whole thing. So I just wanted to show you as well what I do, because obviously I don't just sit down and do this all in one go. And because of the nature of tambour, since it's one continuous thread, you just need to cast on and off once, really. The only reason I would ever cast on and off again is because of this. So if your threads get weird like this, sometimes it's just easier to restart because it's hard to negotiate this looseness from the strands. But because if you pull on it, it will completely fall out. All I do is I put a pin in where the stitches will go so that the holes in the silk aren't noticeable. And then I wrap it around as many times as I can. And I usually also try to put it through. And that's fine. Okay, let's do a little wrap up. I'm not really sure how long it's been, but I feel like I've been talking about this dress for years, which I have. Thank you so much for watching if you've made it this far. I will be putting a list with all of my supplies for fabric, trims, quantities and prices and links on my Patreon when I do a wrap-up post, so stay tuned for that. The link will be here if you want to check it out. Any help is much appreciated. Your support is amazing. And yeah, pray for me with this dress. I mean, it will be finished one day, right? That's what I have to keep thinking. Oh my god, you guys have found it! No more crooked embroidery for me.